But I think it's kind of interesting to even think of like, kind of, I don't know, what does it even really mean to be like from
Yeah.
somewhere? Because it's not always as clear cut as, what's your passport or what's your official nationality. You can live in a place and be in a place and really have a strong affinity for it, sometimes stronger than for your home country. And you really feel that sense of national pride. But I don't even think it's just the national pride. I think it's good to see human beings flourishing and doing better. I think if you have a genuine love for humanity, then it tends to go beyond the scope of just, quote unquote, your people or your nation. And it just generally makes you feel good to see people doing well and to see a community doing better, right? You talk about how it was 5 years ago and then you see it now and it's an improvement, and that's good to see.
We have renowned rapper, podcaster, author, I believe champion women's deadlifter, Zuby with us today. I always wanted to be one of those people that just needed one name. I could never pull it off with being named Mike, but stoked that you're here with us today.
Mike, good to see you, man. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
And first time in El Salvador.
First time in El Salvador, first time on Bitcoin Beach, and first time on the podcast.
Nice. So you are in town. Why?
I'm in town for Nayib Bukele's inauguration, which I'll be going to in a couple of days. I was invited, and so I've never been to a presidential inauguration before. And he is one of my favorite world leaders. There are not many politicians in general, let alone presidents and prime ministers in this world, that I particularly have a lot of respect and admiration for. But seeing what he's been doing in this country and being here in person and seeing some of that turnaround firsthand is remarkable. I think he's a courageous man. I think he's a great leader, and he seems to be trending the country in a really positive direction. And every local person I've spoken to in the few days I've been here so far seems to have a very positive impression of him, with a 92% approval rating or whatever it is. I mean, that's unheard of
Yeah.
worldwide. I travel a lot. I've been to many, many dozens of different countries, and most people have quite a disdain for their national leader, or at best are kind of lukewarm, or they're just very polarizing, where half the people like them and half of the people can't stand them. And yeah, he seems to be doing something very, very different in that regard. So that's what brought me here. And I figured instead of just coming for a couple of days or just for a weekend, let me come for at least a week and really see what's going on.
Well, I'm glad you decided to, so we can get you here on the show. I've been following you for quite a while on Twitter, and I did see this week you talking about that, and somebody say, "Hey, you've only been there for a few days. How can you really say that you have a?" And I could see them having that opinion if
For
you
sure.
hadn't been here. But when you're here, it's like so overwhelming that you're like, "Okay, no, I'm asking all these people, and they are wanting to talk about the president and wanting to talk about how
Hmm.
happy they are." So it is one of those things where you can, after a few days, already have a sense of where the population's at.
Yeah, for sure. I travel so much. I think this is I actually counted before this podcast. This is my 44th country that I've been to. I mean, some of those on that list I've been to many dozens of times. But yeah, just when I travel, I like to not just, I'm not someone who travels and just sort of stays in one spot and doesn't talk to anyone or just sort of hangs out at a resort or a beach or anything like that. To me, that's not really proper traveling. I like to talk to people. I like to go to different parts of the city or the region or the country as a whole. I like to talk to everybody that I can, whether that's Uber or taxi drivers or it's random people at a shop that I'm at or at a restaurant, whatever the case may be. I like to interact with locals and just do my best to really get a vibe of whatever city or nation that I'm in.
Well, it's funny when you leave here, next place you go, when you're talking to the Uber driver, mention that you've been in El Salvador, and I can almost guarantee you that your Uber driver will start talking about Nayib Bukele. That's been
Yeah.
my experience. Whether I'm in Miami
Mm.
or anywhere in Latin America in an Uber, and you mentioned you're from El Salvador, they're like, Nayib Bukele, like that. It's
It's dope.
amazing
It's good.
how.
It's good. You can. I've only been here for a few days, but I can feel the positive energy. One thing I'm really sensitive to when I travel from place to place is what trajectory somewhere is on. I don't just notice how things are in the immediate, but you can tell which direction things are trending in, and you get a different feeling and energy, and people have an overall different attitude between optimism and pessimism, depending on if the general population feels like somewhere is getting better and that they have things to look forward to in the future versus places where it's like, oh, our best times are behind us and things are now declining. So you have places where, as it currently is, they're not that bad. They're okay, but there's this general sense of decline, and younger people are feeling like they're not going to have it as good as their parents or even their grandparents in some cases. And
Most of the first world you're describing right now.
well, I wouldn't even say all of it. I mean, even if you look at a country like the US, I mean, you've got certain cities, maybe like a New York City, a San Francisco, and LA, certainly certain parts of it where, if you want to go back further, you've obviously got places like Detroit and so on, which have already experienced severe decline. But these sort of top tier global cities, as they've always been throughout my entire lifetime, there's generally a sense amongst people who live there and even people outside it that they're getting worse rather than better. Whereas you have cities in that same country in the U.S., whether it could be Miami, it could be Dallas, it could be certain parts of Utah, it could be Las Vegas, where things seem to be on an upward trend. More and more people are coming rather than going. People generally have a sense of, oh, okay, this place is going to be better in 5 or 10 years than it is right now. And the feeling is palpable. The feeling is palpable. Some of it you can measure, but some of it is also just a sense generally amongst the population. I think it's hard to measure quantitatively how optimistic and positive people are feeling. It's very subjective, but it's something that you can quite quickly notice when you actually have your feet down somewhere and you are talking to people and interacting and just feeling I feel weird saying feeling the energy. It feels very like vibey. Feel the vibes, man. But it's real.
Well, I think while you're saying it's hard to measure, that is, those type of animal spirits are the most important thing, whether a place is going to develop and move forward, is the attitude of the people. And so while it is hard to measure, that's what you see in cities that are rising up, is that sense of optimism, that sense that people are willing to sacrifice today because they believe tomorrow will be better, versus places where they feel like, well, this is as good as it's going to get. And so we might as well just live for today. And El Salvador 5 years ago was the exact opposite. People really felt like this was just terminal decline, and they really did live for the day. They didn't want to invest in their community because their plan was to leave to the US illegally for a lot of them. And so there was this real sense of despair, where now, like you're saying, you just show up in the airport and you just feel there's something different. You can't put your finger on it, but it's in the air.
Yeah, it's even little things like the ride from the Uber into San Salvador. And I noticed it was at night, and I noticed all the lampposts, all the lights with the Salvadorian flag, the blue, white, and blue, just all the way down the entire 45-minute journey, just seeing that. And I was like, that's cool, right? It's a small symbol, but it means something, right? Seeing the nation's flag like that lit up, it shows, okay, we at a minimum have pride in our nation. And we've intentionally put this from the airport because we want this to be the first thing that you see and that you sense. We want you to see thousands, no, not hundreds, thousands of our flags. And just that alone is cool. I mean, I'm from the UK, and I feel like in the UK these days, they'd almost be afraid to do that. It would
It's
be
hate
seen.
speech.
Yeah, it would be. It would be a bit gauche. It's a bit too much. It's like, no, like, why? What's wrong with flying your nation's flag? I know in certain pockets of the U.S. there's that same mentality where you have people who are very. It's like waving a U.S. flag has now become some sort of right wing Republican symbol or whatever. Oh, American flag means you're a Trump supporter or whatever it is. And I'm not American, but I know that earlier in my lifetime it wasn't like that.
No.
Right, flying your nation's flag was not seen as just associated with a particular ideology or political party, let alone any type of animus, any type of bigotry or hatred or anything like that. I mean, it's really goofy. I think a country's not a country's cultural health is not in a good place when showing the national flag, something that actually all the people there are supposed to unite under and in theory have some sort of positive association with, is viewed by a significant chunk of the country as some type of hate symbol or sign of bigotry or sign of oppression or anything like that. So yeah, I'm a big flag fan. I like the fact that they wave the flag proudly.
Yeah, it's been fun for me to see because that was not, like I said, you go back 5 or 6 years and that was not happening.
Mm,
Most Salvadorans weren't that proud to be from El Salvador. Even when they're outside the country, they'd say like, "Oh, I'm from Central
yeah.
America," because it was known as the murder capital of the
Yep.
world. And oh, if I tell them Salvadoran, they're gonna think I'm a gang member. Where
Mm.
now you have this real sense of deep national pride. And so it's fun, as a resident who is very invested in the country. I'm not Salvadoran, but I have spent a good portion of my life here, raised my kids here. Um, it's amazing just seeing that transformation. And so I feel a sense of pride. Maybe it's not my country per se, but I feel this
Well,
secondary
it
pride.
is in a way. I mean, it is in a way. I mean, you've got people who are born here and then, they leave and they've been living, maybe they've got the passport, but they've never really lived here, haven't grown up here or something. And then you've got yourself, you've been here for what, 2 decades?
Yeah.
You've raised your children here and so on. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not even trying to get too philosophical here, but I think it's kind of interesting to even think of like, kind of, I don't know, what does it even really mean to be like from somewhere?
Yeah.
Because it's not always as clear cut as, what's your passport or what's your official nationality. You can live in a place and be in a place and really have a strong affinity for it, sometimes stronger than for your home country. And you really feel that sense of national pride. But I don't even think it's just the national pride. I think it's good to see human beings flourishing and doing better. I think if you have a genuine love for humanity, then it tends to go beyond the scope of just, quote unquote, your people or your nation. And it just generally makes you feel good to see people doing well and to see a community doing better, right? You talk about how it was 5 years ago and then you see it now and it's an improvement. And that's good to see. Just in the same way that it doesn't feel good when you go to, I don't know, downtown San Francisco and you're in one of the wealthiest cities in one of the wealthiest countries in the entire world, and you're just seeing all these people strung out on drugs and doing their fentanyl and their heroin and whatever, and there's just lying around, just sleeping on the street, and it's dirty and it's messy. It's just like it doesn't evoke a good feeling. It's just like, man, this is miserable. This is just human suffering and depravity, and maybe you don't have the individual power to really do something about it, but you want to. And I think that sense of powerlessness is one of the things that's also quite upsetting. But then, like I said earlier on, you've got the flip side of that, where when you just see people doing well, then yeah, I think if you are a decent person who cares about humanity, then it makes you feel good too, even if you're not from the place. Like it's my first time ever being in this country, and I feel happy for the people here. I feel happy that things are getting in a better direction. I'm totally aware that it's not fully developed and everything's not perfect and there's still massive amounts of issues and problems, but progress is good. Progress is good if things are getting better, then you give it a long enough time frame, and as long as the leadership is good and people behave in a certain way, then things will continue to improve.
I'm curious, when did El Salvador first pop up on your radar, and what was it that got you to start following what was happening here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've known about the country, at least heard of the name for several decades. What was it that made me, I think over the last sort of 4 to 5 years, I think them making Bitcoin legal tender, definitely that headline was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I had been wondering, I've been in Bitcoin since 2017, and I had been wondering, okay, what will be the first country to embrace this
Mhm.
properly, and what will that look like? So when I heard, oh, El Salvador becomes the first country in the world, there's a lot of countries in the world, it becomes the first one to make it legal tender. I remember thinking, oh, that's dope. And I also remember thinking that's a bit random because if you'd asked me to predict which country would do it first, and you gave me 30 guesses, I don't think I would have guessed El Salvador.
Yeah.
So that definitely put it on my map, on my radar as, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then I was watching from a distance as to, just online social media, seeing what's going on. And then over the last couple of years, there are people that I follow, Max Kaiser, Stacey Herbert. I remember seeing them starting to post about their trips to El Salvador. I started, just seeing people going out and visiting and things popping up here and there. And then, of course, learning more about Nayib Bukele and, what he's done in terms of, it going from being the most dangerous country, one of the most dangerous countries in the entire world, to being, I believe, the safest in the entire region. I
think in all of the Americas now. I think
maybe in all the
tied,
Americas.
tied with Canada or
Okay,
something
yeah,
like that.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? So you never see that happen.
No.
That's not really a thing. And so I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's fascinating. I need to look more into this individual and this country. And then, I'd say maybe around 2019, 2020, it came on my radar as a place. It's like, oh yeah, that's somewhere I would like to visit. And that's somewhere I'll visit in the next few years. I don't know exactly what will bring me out there, but lo and behold, I find that in my life, oftentimes I usually visualize and know things are going to happen before they do. I don't always know how it's going to materialize, but normally a few years after that, it does. Like even with these podcasts that I do, there's so many people that I've spoken to and recorded with and met and am now acquainted with, who I knew it was going to happen. I had no idea how. Like I knew I would meet Elon. I had no idea. Like decade ago, I knew, I'm going to meet Elon Musk somehow. I'm going to meet Joe Rogan, and I'm going to be on Joe Rogan's podcast. I'm going to talk to someone. I didn't know. I at the time I had no idea how that would happen.
Well,
But
I was
just like, it'll
researching
happen.
this last week because I knew
Yeah.
we'd be doing this show, and
Yeah.
you've sat down with all the big names.
A lot of people.
I was like,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Impressive
Thank you.
resume, and I love the interaction that you have with them, because you really bring out the best in them. I think.
Oh,
I think
thank you.
I don't know what it is. You have that natural ability to. I think it's that positive attitude to really. We were talking about earlier. You hit the hard, controversial topics, but you somehow do it in a way and still are nice and friendly. And I feel like when I try to hit controversial topics, a lot of times I come off looking like a jerk. But you have this way of like not backing down and being like, no, this is ridiculous, but doing it with a smile and in a friendly way. So I don't know if that's just a natural talent or if that's something you've really striven to, build into for the last decade.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that assertiveness plus kindness is a lethal in the good way combo. And I think that's just something that I've managed to hone over the past 2 decades in particular. I mean, I think some of it is just my natural personality and my belief system, but I think a lot of it has also just been forged in the background way before I started being on as public as I am now. So, I mean, I used to just be, an independent rapper in the UK. I actually released my very first album in 2006. So we're talking 18 years ago now, which is half my life, which doesn't seem like that long ago to me. But I mean, the way I really built my name and reputation and kept myself afloat in the UK for over a decade was just going out on the street and talking to people and selling my CDs. And so, I mean, I sold over 30,000 albums hand to hand.
Really?
In the UK, yeah. So before 99.9% of people who have now heard of me had heard of me, I'd already sold tens of thousands of albums. And to sell tens of thousands of albums hand to hand, you have to talk to hundreds of thousands of people. So yes, of course, you develop your sales skills, but you just learn how to be a darn good communicator. And if you're doing that and the goal is for people to buy what you're doing, but you're also talking to absolute strangers, like I mastered the art of taking someone from being a complete stranger who'd never heard of me or my music to within a matter of minutes being a fan and buying my albums. And I did that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times.
Probably some of them didn't even like rap music.
Oh, for sure. I converted them. I still converted them, right? And so to be able to do that, I think that's the combination it needs, right? You have to be kind and you have to be amiable, but you also have to be assertive, not pushy. And that's a balance. And maybe, just going back to what you said, thank you for the compliment, by the way. I think that over the course of time, I've just naturally integrated that into how I communicate both. I learned it offline, and I guess that it just translates online as well, where I'm able to, talk about whatever it may be or sit down with, such a broad range of different types of people, whether I'm in the hot seat or I'm the one doing the interviewing, and, just be able to relate to different people regardless of their walk of life. Someone might see me I don't know, someone might look at us two in a room and think, what do these guys have in common? It's like, well, actually a lot. And I think that's another benefit of traveling the world and talking to people is you just get to, I know you've done mission work. And so you learn quickly how to just relate to people, find common ground, break the ice, get over that weird, uncomfortable stage that you can have, right? When you meet someone who's brand new, particularly if you're from a different culture, maybe you don't perfectly even speak the same language, whatever it is. And you just learn how to do that. And so, yeah, I love communicating with people. As I already said, like I love people in general, as much as they annoy me sometimes. I'm a big lover of humanity, and I'd like to see us all doing better. So I just do my
Are you an
best. That's all.
introvert or an extrovert?
Hyper extrovert.
Hyper extrovert.
Yeah, super
Okay.
extrovert. Yeah, but an extrovert who's very comfortable being alone and who spends a huge amount of time alone, partly just because of the nature of my work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could have told me either, and I would have believed it. 'Cause
Yeah.
you have that kind of deep, pensive like sense of somebody who's a deep thinker that maybe needs to recharge, but you're
Yeah.
also great with people. So I
Yeah.
didn't
No,
know.
I can be out there all the time, nonstop. I get my energy from people.
Yeah, I'm definitely more of an introvert. I
Mhm.
think the older I get, I love people, but I have to go away and recharge for a while. So I love this type of setting where it's one on one, but when it's like the group setting,
Yep.
those are the ones that suck the life out of me.
We need
So,
both. We need both types of people in the
yeah,
world, man.
definitely. So I mean, you really are the true Renaissance man, from musical performer to podcaster to author. You were telling me you're working on your third book right
Hmm.
now. Obviously fitness is something that's extremely important to you. And then I love how you were able to bring that in to even speak into cultural issues. When I was doing research on you, I was like, oh, he made waves when he beat the female deadlifting record in the UK, I believe it was, by identifying as female, while you're
Yeah, that was fun.
obviously to bring up the absurdness of letting males
Do you
participate
know the
in female
craziest thing about that,
sports.
Mike? Is that was more than 5 years ago.
Really?
That was February 2019 when I posted that. And what's remarkable is that this quote unquote debate is still going on, when it's one of those things where, I mean, it wasn't a debate 10 years ago, but
It was
we're
just
just
common
at,
sense.
it's just common sense. But, we're living in this strange time where, by the way, I do think we are past peak woke. I've said this on many podcasts. I believe we're past peak woke,
I agree.
but still there are these strange sort of discussions and battlegrounds and debates that are happening, which are largely a distraction, I believe, just from the things that we really should be more focused on and talking about. Sometimes I actually get frustrated with myself because I'm just like, I don't even want to. So after I did that deadlift video, I mean, I got invited on, some of the biggest podcasts in the world and TV shows and just all sorts of things. And it was cool, and I'm glad that so many people got introduced to me through it. But in the back of my mind the whole time, I was just like, why are we even having this conversation? Why are we having this debate? Like, this is so stupid. Like, this is
It's just,
this is really silly.
if
Like,
somebody would have told you 10 years ago that would be a debate, you're like, no way. There's no
yeah,
way.
yeah. Like, why are we really gonna sit here and pretend that? Because that's all it is. It's just playing pretend, and we're really gonna just pretend that males and females are the same, like identical, and that
Interchangeable,
interchangeable, and
go
men
back
are
and
not
forth.
stronger and
Yeah.
faster and bigger. Like, before people even knew what science was, they were aware of these differences. Just because it's so obvious and blatant and in your face, and all day, every day, as you walk around, you can be like, yeah, that's a man, that's a woman, that's a man, that's a woman, that's what, there's, it's not a spectrum.
Yeah.
and everyone knows this, but somehow, I don't know, millions of people were kind of like brainwashed and psyoped into sort of playing along with this weird game of the emperor's got new clothes, and no one really wants to just say the thing because it's like, oh, well, I don't want to be called a name. I don't want to be canceled. I don't want to, upset anyone, whatever it is. And it's like, man, just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. You don't need to be any more aggressive or abrasive or nasty than that. But if we cannot, as a society, just speak honestly about things that are really, 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 really obvious, then we're in trouble. And I know that a lot of that is social pressure. I do understand the reasons why it is psychologically, but it's a big issue. The same thing happened in the 2020 to 2022 period with the whole time period I refer to as the scamdemic. A lot of the same thing went on where people just were giving into absurdities and things that doing and saying things that very obviously didn't make sense. It wasn't logical. It wasn't rational. It wasn't
And they'd get
scientific.
mad when you would
And
try to
getting,
have a logical conversation.
yeah. And stuff like that is scary.
Yeah.
Stuff like that actually, I'm not afraid of a lot, but when that kind of thing is happening en masse in a society, because it makes you think, gosh, am I going crazy? I'm just like, I'm the same person I was in 2019. I didn't just suddenly switch up in the way that other people are. And now all of a sudden, it's weird because, and now I can say all those same things. So for like 2019, I was normal. 2024, I'm normal. But somehow 2020 to 2022, like I was, I don't know, some crazy conspiratorial, anti-vax, anti-this, like, I was like, I've just been consistent. And largely my position was just the pro-liberty one of like, hey, like people have their basic rights and civil liberties, and people should be able to make the choices and the risk assessments that make sense for them because we're all different. And this goes with pretty much everything. But due to the PR campaign and the marketing and the fear and this and that, it just became this weird, hyper polarized time period. I'm glad we're over it, though.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're over it for the most part.
Do you think when things like whether it's that or the trans issue in sports, I mean, do you think it's important that we are speaking into these things, or is that just sucking us into things? We should be focusing on something else, or
yeah, look, as a society overall, yes, we should be focused on other things, but the apathy does not work because the reason why those things got to the level that they did is because enough sane people were not just speaking up and being honest. So when you have a small intransigent minority who really is pushing something, it could be the most absurd idea ever, but if they're pushing it aggressively nonstop and they're gaining ground with it, and the vast majority of people either go along with it or just don't say anything, which is kind of the same as going along with it, then you'll be surprised by how gnarly things can get. I mean, it's happened many times in history. It's not a new thing. It's happened many times in history, and I think people tend to look back at those things and go, oh, how did it get that far?
Well, I remember studying those things and thinking, yeah, but we're past that.
We're not.
We'd never do something like that again. But this past decade has been eye-opening for me that we're not any different.
Do you know something scary, Mike? Is that human beings we are not different from our ancestors. We're not, right? We're not evolved from our grandparents or our like we're the same people. We have the same emotions, the same biological wiring. We have the same the only things that change, I've said this many times before, like if you think of modern people in modern society, we really only have two advantages over our ancestors, whether this is our ancestors in the 1900s, 1800s, 1700s, whatever it is. One, we have more and better technology. So we can do cool things like what we're doing right now, which our grandparents couldn't do. And two, we have access to history, should we choose to look at it. That's it. Those are the only advantages we have. We're not bigger. We're not stronger. We're not faster. We're not smarter. We're not like human beings are. We have not changed much in thousands of years. So we have the same virtues. We have the same vices. We have the same flaws. We have the same proclivity to sin. We have the same proclivity towards altruism and kindness. We also have the same capability for violence and wickedness. In fact, with all of these things, all that's happened because of the technology is it's scaled up.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a greater capacity for good, but we also have a greater capacity for destruction. If you go back 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago, there wasn't the technology to just annihilate every human being on Earth. It didn't exist. We have that technology now. Like, how many nuclear bombs exist around? There is the potential that we have the capacity and the technology right now. Should all the world leaders choose to just go nuts simultaneously, that every single human being on the planet could just be just wiped out in under a minute. That's new. Like, that's relatively new. And so we've just got to really be careful with that. You can look on let just take a technology that is again relatively new, just in the past 2 decades or so, but is completely ubiquitous. Social media, the internet and social media and smartphones. And you have there's a capacity to do great good with it. Both on an individual level and on a societal level, but there's also a capacity to do huge amounts of damage, whether this is hurting people's self-image or their mental well-being, or creating addictions where addictions didn't used to be, leading people down certain rabbit holes, exposing people to certain types of imagery or video, like things that before you just wouldn't have seen or heard. And so the question is just, okay, we've got this technology and it keeps going and it keeps improving and changing. And it's just like, okay, well, what are we going to do with this? And I think we always have to keep ourselves in check. I know I always keep myself in check by just remembering, like, okay, I'm not, like, I'm just as capable of, like, when I look at history, when people read history, they always want to imagine they'd be the good guy, right? Everyone would be the person who freed the slaves and who hid the Jews in their house, during the Nazi regime, and who would have stopped the genocide, and who would have, statistically, most people would have been apathetic.
Yeah.
And quite a lot of people would have been the quote unquote bad guy in these things. And no one wants to read history like that because it's not pleasant. But I think to be a genuinely good person, it's important to understand your dark side and the capacity for evil and wickedness and sin, and know, oh, okay, I'm a human being and human beings can do that. So therefore I could do that. There could be some world, some alternate reality where, I or someone like me is the person doing this horrible, terrible stuff. So that's how you keep it in check. Because if you don't even think you're capable of it, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's really dangerous if you don't think you're even capable of those things, because stuff can go weird, and all of a sudden things are not as calm and peaceful and what's the word I'm looking for? Predictable as they usually are, and you're finding yourself being pushed in a certain way, or maybe society or the culture or the nation is trending in a certain direction and it's pulling in a lot of people, and you need to be able to check that and go, actually, wait, no, hang on, I'm not going to. I can feel myself, kind of going in this direction a little bit. Let me put that in check. And I think we all do this on a day-to-day basis, right? Because we have emotions, right? We all get angry, we get mad. When you get angry, like, there'll be something in your head which you want to say, but you're like, no, let me not say that, right? You get a feeling, oh, I want to do that thing. You feel the aggression. It's like, no, let me not, right? There's no man who's listening to this podcast who's like, you've never wanted to hit anyone. You've never, like, of course you have, right? But you don't, you don't do it. You recognize, okay, I have this feeling, I have this capacity for violence, I have this ability to lash out in this way. But you're like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. You're constantly just recalibrating. So I don't want to give a massive lecture. I'm just brain dumping some of these thoughts
I
and
love
ideas.
This is the stuff that actually is important in life.
Yeah.
And has a big impact. I am curious as to hear your Bitcoin story and how that kind of fits in with the other values and things that you're pursuing in life. Because, as I mentioned before, like, you have a wide swath of areas that you have some expertise in,
Mm.
and I know that you've been a speaker at a number of Bitcoin conferences, but I wouldn't say that that's like your focus in life. You
Mm.
probably wouldn't describe yourself firstly as a Bitcoiner. You would, you know. So I'm curious as to how it came about, what your Bitcoin story is, and how you've wound up speaking at a number of these events.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm actually a computer science graduate. So I studied computer science at Oxford from 2008 to 2011. I graduated in 2011. And wait, no, no, sorry, that's wrong. That's wrong. I'm
I'm
giving,
glad I'm not the
I'm,
only one
I'm
that
giving,
does this.
I'm giving wrong dates here. 2011 is when I went full time with my music career. I graduated in 2007.
Okay.
I was at university 2004 to 2007. Got it. Yeah. Um, and so being in computer science, coding, programming, whatever, I've always been interested in computers, technology, stuff like that. I want to say I first heard about Bitcoin maybe like 2012 or 2013. I don't even know exactly how, probably on an internet forum or something like that. But honestly, I never looked into it. The first time I heard about Bitcoin, I thought it was like something like PayPal, or like maybe an in-game currency for some PC game or something. I just never really paid much attention to it. I just saw the word, but I didn't know what it meant. If someone asked me at that time, what is Bitcoin? I would have been like, I have no idea. Um, and then in 2017, I started hearing about it more and more. I particularly had one friend on Facebook named Kelly in the UK who was, I think he just like invested in a bunch of different cryptocurrencies and including Bitcoin, and was just, that was, during the 2017 bull market, and was just making gains. So he was just kind of like, I think he was like posting screenshots of like how much money he was making, and oh cool, I just got a 200% return on this thing and on that. And I was just like, I kind of kept seeing it, and I was just like, Bitcoin. I heard about it enough times that I was like, okay, I'm gonna learn what this is. I keep hearing this word, I keep hearing this name. Let me look into this. So this is probably October 2017. And so I'm like, okay, I think I probably Googled what is Bitcoin. And I just spent an afternoon learning. And I was sold on the concept really quickly. After about 10 minutes, I was like, okay, this is interesting. Like, wait, a a decentralized digital currency that's not run by any central bank or government, which is limited. That was the part that was kind of weird, because Bitcoin is the first digital thing that is limited. Because normally when you think of anything digital, it's like, well, you can just make copies of it. So obviously it's infinite if it's digital. I was like, no, okay, but it's scarce. And then I was learning about the mining and so on. So I was far from an expert, but just as someone who has natural leanings, more libertarian-ish, and who is aware of some of the issues of central banking and the current way monetary policy is. I was already aware of the inflation and going off the gold standard, and the fact that fiat currency isn't really backed by anything. And you have to also remember, I'm British, but I'm also Nigerian, and so yeah, the British pound has decreased in value significantly over the past 100 years, probably 90% plus. But if you look at the naira, the Nigerian currency, was just, boy, it used to be on par with the pound, and
Really?
now it's like 1 to 2,000. Right, so it went from being 1 to 1 to being 1 to 2,000. And so you've seen that. I remember when I was in school, when Zimbabwe, I had some friends from Zimbabwe at school, and remember when it went through the hyperinflation. I remember,
Which time?
oh
It's been
boy, man,
it's been a few
yeah,
cycles
there's been
with
a
them.
few. This would be like early to mid 2000s.
Okay.
And I remember, friends coming into school, and they had these like $100 trillion notes and whatever. And again, I did study economics at school for a couple of years, but I was just like, okay, this makes sense. This obviously is something that's valuable. And again, in my lifetime, I'm an interesting age because I'm 37, so I've seen a lot of
Does that
technological.
make you a millennial? Are you a
I'm a
millennial?
millennial,
You're a
yeah,
millennial. All right.
but I've seen a lot of technological adoption curves. in my lifetime. So with whether it's all the different video game consoles or just home PCs in general, laptops, the internet, email, not just social media, but each of the social media platforms. I've been on Facebook for 20 years, right? I joined Facebook in 2004. I remember when I joined Facebook, everyone was like, this is stupid, this is pointless, nobody uses it. But so all slow, right? All the things. I remember when people said that about the internet, they said it about email, they said it about everything. And I was like, wait, yeah, things start out slow and people aren't using them and it's confusing and not everybody gets it, whatever. So like Bitcoin's just doing this, it's going through the same curve. And I just saw that very plainly. And so I bought my first Bitcoin in November 2017. And this was also like when the market was really heating up. So I remember like buying, I was running one of my pop-up shops at the time. And I remember I was just like market buying Bitcoin with my debit card through the Coinbase app really recklessly. And every time I bought, like, no, it was just number go up. Number, I was just like, what the heck? Have I just discovered like the fountain of money? I didn't have a lot of money at the time, so I wasn't putting in a lot, but I was just like, what the heck? I just put in, I put in 100 pounds yesterday and today it's like 112.
And that was even with the insane fees they had
Yeah,
at
yeah,
that
yeah,
time.
exactly. I wasn't even getting like a good rate or whatever. And I was just like, this is okay. I'm going to buy more. Let me put in 1,000 pounds. Let me put, right. And it kept going up. So I think at that time, I mean, no, if I remember correctly, like November to December 2017, Bitcoin ran from something like 7,000 to $20,000 in about 6 weeks. So I was just like, it's probably the most dangerous time to get
Oh, yeah.
involved, right? Because I'm just like, I'm a genius, right? Like, I just put money in this thing and the number just goes up. Like, what the heck? Like, this is amazing, right? And then oh my gosh, there's something called Ethereum and there's something called Litecoin and these ones are going up even faster, right? So I just was like like every spare bit of money I had because I was running my pop-up shop selling my t-shirts, my CDs, my merch and everything, and it was Christmas time. So all the Christmas shoppers were there. So I was making, for me at the time, pretty good money. I was making, several £100s a day in cash, right? And so I was just like, boom, go to the bank, buy more. So just buy more. So I was just dumping like everything I was earning. I was like, oh wow, I had an amazing day. I earned £500. Cool, boom, dump it all in Bitcoin. And then of course, the market peaked out. I want to say around December 20 something, 2017. And then, boom, there was like a little dip. And I just started going ham. And then I remember early 2018, I remember Bitcoin kind of flatlined a little. Then there was like this crazy alt season. And then the market just began to just burn out and crap out and dump. And at this point, I was probably in like, I'm sure a lot of people listening have gone through this. I probably had like 25 different coins in my portfolio, right? Because you keep hearing about this one's the next Bitcoin. No, this one's the next Bitcoin. So you're just like just gambling, right? Throwing money in all these things or whatever. And then it all starts like, dumping out and crapping out. But to my credit, I never ever sold my Bitcoin, right? So some of them I sold back like into Bitcoin. I was like, ooh, I don't know about this. But because I kept learning. So to my credit, I kept learning. So I did like the initial learning, then I got kind of caught up in the market hype. And then I was just like, okay, let me learn more about this. So in 2018, 2019, that's when I really started like getting a better idea of the market overall and the value proposition of Bitcoin versus the other cryptos and so on. And I kept drip feeding. Like I actually kept buying with the little disposable income I had at the time. I kept buying, and over the course of time, I was like consolidating more and more into Bitcoin because it was just like, all right, you chase this one. Oh boy, that didn't go well. That didn't go well. And so that was my story. And then, yeah, it just maintained over the course of time. The conviction grows, the understanding grows, and I think as the understanding grows, the conviction grows and your time horizon grows as well. It went from just being something I was like, oh, November 2017, wow, I found the get rich quick cheat code. And then now it's more like, okay, I'm looking at this in terms of decades and generations.
And self-sovereignty.
Exactly, self-sovereignty. And I think that Bitcoin is going to do for money what the internet has done for information. So yeah, over the course of time, yeah, you live and you learn. And I think probably the best way to learn sometimes is to, get some wins, but take some massive L's, take some massive L's as well, so you can reflect back on them and be like, okay, what would I have done differently in hindsight? What did I get caught up in? And also, you learn the emotional control,
Yeah.
as well, because it is scary. I mean, prior to Bitcoin and the wider crypto market, the speed of chopping and changing and prices up and prices down, like the speed and the aggressiveness of the swings, I mean, that didn't exist in any other market consistently. I mean, stocks, it's like, oh my gosh, if something goes up 5% in a day, like this is this is a huge
It's
deal.
extreme move.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then I was just like, I'm holding this, oh my gosh, like I remember holding through that drop from late 2017, where Bitcoin dropped from what, 20,000 to about 3,000 something dollars. And the emotion, dealing with the, like, I'm very good at keeping my emotions in check. I'm a very I'm a very unneurotic individual. But even I was like, holy crap, like this thing I bought has like lost 70 something, 70, 80% of its dollar value. But at the same time, as I'm learning more, I'm like, but I want more of it. And I know it's going to bounce back and actually end up. I was like, man, I see this thing going to like hundreds of thousands. I remember there was a point where, because I didn't start making good money until 2019. So from like 2011 to 2019, I was just like, barely breaking even. I was making enough to keep myself alive and keep my music career going. Yeah, but like 2019, 2020, that's when I started like, okay, cool. Like I'm now making good money. And I remember when the market was down, I remember my biggest annoyance being like, oh man, I wish I had more pounds to invest in this, because I just didn't have. I was like, I can see where this is going, and I want to bet on this asset. And I did what I could.
Yeah.
But I was like, man, I wish I had like, tons of money to like just throw into this, and people will call me crazy or whatever. But I think that's where it is. So I guess and then there's a long answer. And then over the course of time, I mean, I don't publicly post or talk that much about Bitcoin, but I do sometimes. I am a Bitcoiner, to use the term, and I do think it's I've in private gotten a lot of people into it, including my parents and some of my siblings and some of my friends and so on. On social media, I think I'm at the point where I'll mention it like once in a while, but sometimes I kind of can't be bothered, because I'm not trying to, how would I put it? I myself get a little bit tired of dealing with the same responses.
Yeah.
Right. You probably know this better than I do.
Scheme.
Yeah. When people are still, I'm like, man, your talking points from 2017 are getting tired, right? It's just like, if you get it, you get it.
Yeah.
So there are certain things where I'm like, I'm very happy to explain to people, especially in person. Like I'll explain anything, but online with just random anons and whatever, I'm like, look, if you don't get it, or if you think that's a scam or what, like, cool. Before it was like, no, I want to like back and forth with you and try to convince you. And now I'm just like, okay, you think it's a Ponzi scheme? Cool. You know what I mean? Like, I never say the have fun staying poor thing, because I don't think it's a very kind thing to say. But in my brain, I think it. I'm like, okay, like if you just want to hold on to your dollars as they inflate them away into oblivion, fine. Like, people can do what they like with their own money. Just like I wouldn't, I get annoyed when someone's like, no, you're stop buying. I've had people tell me like not to buy Bitcoin. I'm like, no, like I'm going to do it. And similarly, if someone out there is like, no, I think gold is a better investment, or I prefer real, like, cool, God bless you. That's fine. I think at this point in the game, not owning any Bitcoin is a way greater risk than owning some. Even if someone's not like fully convinced or fully bought in, or they don't fully understand the technology and the value proposition at this point in 2024, I'm like, man, if you have it being on zero, I think that's the high risk play. I think being on zero is the high risk play. I'm like, man, at least have some, like, get yourself like 0.01, get yourself like some sats, right? Just have something so that if this thing does go the way that we believe it can and it will, then you're not still on a zero. You've at least got some stake. You've got some stake in this. Yeah.
And I think a lot of the people that you've talked to that kind of blew you off or that, had that response, you'd probably be surprised at the number of them that have come back as they've watched Bitcoin and see it do those moves. And, I think that's a process a lot of people go through. Their first, intuition is to just dismiss it as a Ponzi scheme, but it's the buildup of those people, like, talking to them about it.
I find that, in my experience, I haven't found that most people think it's a Ponzi scheme. I just find that most people just don't know much about it at all.
Yeah.
Like the amount of people to this day, like their minds are blown when I tell them that it's limited to 21 million, right? There's the amount of people who have heard about Bitcoin, but they think that it's infinite, right? And that they can just keep making more Bitcoin. Or the people who don't understand that you don't need to buy a whole Bitcoin and transact in whole Bitcoins at a time. Like, you forget that most people, it's weird because maybe because I'm just, and I guess, like I said, I think I first heard about Bitcoin for a few years before I'd really looked into it myself. But I think in this age of the internet, we often assume that people are better informed than they are because the information is so easy to get. And so it seems odd to me that at this point, someone has heard about Bitcoin and maybe they've heard about it for years and they don't even know just like the most basic aspects about it, when you could just take your phone, instead of writing dumb crap on Twitter, X, you could just go on Google and, type, go to your favorite search engine and just, within 2 minutes, you can understand the basics.
But I mean, most people still think that banks, when they do loans, are actually taking money they got from somebody else and loaning it out. They don't understand that that's just a ledger entry for them, and they're creating money when they do that. So I think in general, a lot of times we assume that people's financial knowledge is a lot higher. In fact, the people that call it a Ponzi scheme are usually the ones that are more educated.
A bit more, because they know what a Ponzi scheme is. Yeah.
So I think for a lot of people, they just don't think about it. They don't think, it's amazing that they don't, because finances impacts every area of their life, and a lot of them are struggling in so many different ways, and they know that, but they never stop to think about what is behind that.
Something I've learned is that I think intellectual curiosity is rarer than I thought it was. I'm a hyper intellectually curious person, and I have been my entire life. And so I think we all have a natural tendency to project our own personality traits and perhaps interests onto other people and assume that most people are mostly like us. And it's just not true. These things exist on, bell curves or some other type of curve. And there are billions of people in this world who are just not intellectually curious. Like they're just not interested in, I mean, like we're similar in a lot of ways. Like we both love traveling, right?
Yeah.
You look at the globe. If you're like me, you look at a globe or you look at a map and you're just like, wow.
I haven't been there yet.
Yeah, look at all these places. I want to see this. I want to see it. There's a lot of people who just they have no interest in leaving their town, even if they have the means. Just not interested, which to me is weird. I'm like, how can you not, like, you're not even interested to go to like the other side of your own country or just like check out that? And they're like, nope, I'm good here. I'm happy here. And I'm like, okay, like you have to kind of just accept that. So with me, I mean, my girlfriend's always like, Zuby, how do you just know these things? Like I just have like all this random information in my head because I'm so curious. Like I want to understand things. I want to know where this is. I want to know what this means. I want to understand how this thing works. Like I'm looking at this can and, I want to know like, how did they make this can? How do they make the water bubbly? How do they like get the right, like I'm just curious. How does this microphone work? Right. It's not enough to just, okay, cool. I talk into a microphone, but I'm curious. Like, how does this work? Like what are the features? I'm very, very curious in that regard. And I understand not everyone is like that. So, that's okay. But one thing I love about people who are into Bitcoin is I think one of the things that does draw people into it is intellectual curiosity, because again, you're still at a relatively early stage in an adoption curve. You're still, innovators and, early adopters. And those type of people, by definition, are going to be above average in intellectual curiosity, and that extends beyond money and finance and Bitcoin and sound money or whatever it might be. Which is why I think when you talk to people who are Bitcoiners and are interested in Bitcoin, you can actually talk to them about a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna have some understanding of politics. They're gonna have an understanding of finances. They're gonna have some understanding of long term versus short term time horizon and investment. And there's just a way that it doesn't mean everyone has the same viewpoints at all, but there's a level of intellectual curiosity that's in there that I believe binds people and brings people together that goes beyond the interest in Bitcoin itself. And I think that's quite an interesting I think it's quite an interesting filter. And I think it's why, in my experience, whenever I talk to people who are like really into Bitcoin, I find them just generally interesting and intellectually stimulating people to talk to because they have thought. Because if you're really interested in Bitcoin, you think about, all right, what does this mean for other? Number one, why does this matter? And to understand why it matters, you need to understand a few other things,
Yeah.
and then to understand its value proposition and to understand the future. And then you start thinking, okay, what impact does this have on future generations? What impact does this have on my family? What impact could this have on politics and on global warfare and on the way that things are funded and investments? And it just plays into, it touches on all these different areas. And so it causes you to think about them.
We've seen that here, even in the projects that we're working in the community with the local kids that were, generally not deep thinkers, that weren't really thinking beyond, playing video games or surfing or whatever. Once they start understanding Bitcoin, it really causes them to start questioning things.
Mm. I
And,
what
and that's what I love about it. I feel like it's almost this, we've seen this, the whole realm of economic development in the world, especially within NGOs,
mm,
for the most part seem to do more harm than good in the world. But I feel like if you inject something like Bitcoin into it, and we've seen it in projects, it's almost like it's that missing secret sauce that
mm.
helps it go from people just like receiving something to them receiving something and then that driving desire for more understanding, putting work into it, doing that. And so for me, that's been eye opening as we've done
Yeah.
this project to see just that. And I feel like I'm doing a horrible job describing it, but
No,
it's
I understand what you're saying because I think what you're saying is I think it helps to change people's time preference. So if you are, particularly if you live in a society where the economy is not great and there's relatively high inflation, I don't mean high UK, US high, I mean high, I don't know, Turkey, Nigeria high. You, like you said earlier on, you develop this, short-term time preference and you have to live for the day, right? You can't save, you can't invest, you can't really think on that much of a long-term basis because money is energy and the money is short term. The energy it's all short term. So the things that you prioritize are things that are just in the immediate, and the idea of sacrificing something now for the future, giving up something now to have something later, all of that stuff, even if that's someone's disposition, it doesn't really make sense to have that mentality when everyone else and the money itself is so fleeting. And so I think something that Bitcoin does, and I've never even really articulated this before, is I think it increases, lengthens out that time preference, which I guess changes how you think about
everything.
how you think about everything else because you're thinking, yeah, money drives a lot. We may not, it's not something that's always like fun to say or talk about or admit, right? We don't want, money makes the world go around, like money, money, money. We don't want to be like, materialistic or sound money obsessed or anything like that. But there's a lot of truth to it. Um, and if you think of money as stored energy or stored labor, then which is what it is, right? You go to work or you create something or you sell something, and that energy and labor is now stored in whatever currency you've chosen to store it in, and then you can buy other people's labor
Hmm.
and energy and products with that same thing. It's all energy exchanges. when you think of it in that way, it also makes you less materialistic, I think, because you don't just think of. I think one reason why people are weird about talking about money, and it's oftentimes this kind of like taboo thing, and people sort of look down on you if you talk about money too much, is I think because people conflate it with materialism. And again, I think that's that, sort of fiat mindset, to use that term, to just think that, oh, money is just something you buy things with. People aren't thinking of it as like, okay, this is my, if you have $100, if you have $10,000, if you have $100,000, $1,000,000, that is that much labor and work and energy that's stored up, which you can then reallocate as you see fit. So if you have a super high inflation rate and that $100 over, 10 years later is now worth $50, or that 100 units of currency 10 years later is now worth 1% of what it was before, then it alters everything. It alters everything. It alters the way that you move in the world. It alters if you're someone who has children, say, it alters the way that you are able to think about saving and investing for them and setting them up. But Bitcoin just disrupts all of this long term, and it fundamentally changes the way people think about money. What's interesting is it's a progressive technology, but also it's kind of a reversion to how money used to be. What's weird about money is it's one of the technologies that's actually gotten worse.
Mhm.
There aren't many technologies that have gotten worse. If you think back to, I don't know, Roman
It's
times.
gotten better in as far as like speed and ease of
Yeah,
sending and moving,
but the money
the
itself,
money itself has gotten worse.
is worse now than it was in 1900,
Yeah.
than it was in 900, than it was probably in 900 BC, right? Because people were using gold. Before, it's like, okay, cool, I've stored up my gold, and that value of your stored labor and energy doesn't, decrease over time. The purchasing power of that gold remains stable. You can come back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, and it's stable. And now with the fiat currency going off the gold currency, going off the gold standard, all of that has evaporated. And it's been evaporated for so long, for most people's lifetimes, that they don't really know any different. And maybe this is one of the things that makes it difficult to understand Bitcoin, because you have a certain perception of money growing up, and then, it's unlimited. It's run by government. Like one of the points people make to push back against Bitcoin sometimes is like, oh, but it's not controlled by any country or bank. Yeah. You're like, yeah, good.
That's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, right, exactly. You're like, that's good. Like it doesn't have to be. Like why have we bought into this narrative that it's not real money, quote unquote,
Yeah.
unless the U.S. government has told you it is, or the UK government has told you it is, or whichever country you're in, make it applicable. Yeah. So I love this podcast, by the way, because it's making me think of ideas and think in directions that I previously haven't. And as I'm speaking, it's making it even. I'm already bullish on Bitcoin, but I'm getting like more bullish as I'm speaking, because I'm just like, man, this is a real fundamental change in how we handle money in the economy.
I think, like you were mentioning, people don't like to talk about it because they associate it with materialism.
Mm.
For me here in El Salvador, it's been like so eye-opening and devastating to see the way money destroys families, because the lack of opportunity, the lack of being able to invest and have your money work for itself, as most Salvadorans have never had any real investment opportunities, things they can invest in, and the wages are so low that for most of them it was just a subsistence. And so they felt that the best thing they could do for their family was to leave illegally to the US
Mm.
and go work there. But what we see time and time again is the father will leave, sometimes the mother, and it's gone for a number of years. Oftentimes winds up meeting somebody else up in the US, has another family.
Mm.
And so stop sending money back down. The kids have grown up without their parents around, so they join the gangs. You have this kind of cycle of destruction. And so this is an economic thing. Like it's not about materialism or flashy cars. It's about people being able to support their families. And so you see how money actually causes the family to break down. And fiat money is what that people don't, none of them know that. They don't know that this
No.
is fiat money that's causing this, but it's this fiat system. So to see the hope come back in El Salvador, and it's for a myriad of reasons. It's not just Bitcoin, but I
Hmm.
think long term Bitcoin is going to bring that economic development opportunity and that ability for them to support their families and for them to have these families that grow up with their parents around. And so, for me, that's why it's so important.
Mm. It's important, man. It touches everything. It touches everything, and this is why I know for a lot of people outside Bitcoin, and even for people inside it, like inside it, like myself, sometimes you find individuals who become like overzealous and borderline religious
Oh
about
yeah,
Bitcoin itself, and
it's still, as I tell
I
people, it's still just money. It's
yeah,
the best
yeah,
money, but it's still just money. Don't let it become your
yes,
idol and your
yes.
god.
I don't think it should be absolutely should not become an idol, and it's not a god. But I can also understand. I think it's such a deep rabbit hole that I can see how and why some people sort of end up that way, particularly if they don't have like like a strong religious faith underneath it. Because it just becomes this like, oh my gosh, this is the solution to all of these different all of these different things, right? You're talking family, you're talking world peace, you're talking about just the economy. And again, the economy is not just money. Again, people hear the word economy and they just think of like, I don't know, Wall Street, or they just think of stock market
Yeah,
tickers or whatever. They don't realize like the economy is the people, it's the market, it's the ability of it's everyone here. If you have a job, if you have a business, all of us are exchanging our time, expertise, effort for we're all trading all the time. If you have any type of job, you are selling or you are part of some type of product or service that offers something that people need, want, value in some way, shape, or form. Doesn't matter if you are a waitress or a CEO, you're offering some type of product or service that people need or want. Um, and it's just so interconnected, and it's more interconnected now than ever because the world's never been more connected than it is now. And I don't see that going back in the bottle. I just think that this century, um, we're just going to become even more interconnected, and the world is going to become smaller in many ways. And that could have some pros, it could have some cons, but that's just the way that things are trending. You
yeah.
can't put the genie back in the bottle. And I'm really curious about this century, man. I spend a lot of time just thinking about how we are in the first quarter of a new century, coming to up towards the end of the first quarter. And if you think back to the 1900s, I mean, imagine being someone who was around in 1924, 100 years ago, and think between 1924 and 2024, how much has happened and how much the world has changed in every aspect. I mean, we're going to have that between now and 21, 24, right? People in 21, 24 are going to look back at this time period in 2024 like we look back at people in
Yeah.
1924, and they're going to be like this is going to be history, and they'll be fascinated and they'll be confused and they'll be the thing is you can't even predict it. That's people like to make predictions, but it's not even predictable. There's no way someone in 1924 would have been able to predict a fragment of the things that happened and that changed in the next 100 years. So people are sitting here now thinking, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen in the next 100 years. It's like, man, none of us have a clue. We have no
Well, you
clue.
look at the predictions that
Yeah,
people made in the past, what the
terrible.
future would look like. Yeah.
Even the predictions from 30 years ago,
Yeah.
terrible, awful predictions, right? Like we have no idea, and we don't know what we know some of the technologies that are coming, but we have no idea what they're going to do. I mean, take artificial intelligence. I mean, I'm quite skeptical about lots of aspects about it in terms of it being a net benefit for humanity, but ultimately, like, I don't know. I have no idea. The current state of AI is, man, I don't even know. I can't even go back to 1924 and really think of an equivalent off the top of my head because, okay, I'm trying to think, what tech did they have in 1924? They had telephones,
Yeah.
You had telephones, like the basic, like super basic telephones where, operator put me through to someone. Okay. So imagine from that to like a smartphone and all the things that a smartphone can do. That is AI in 100 years. Like what we have now is going to be the equivalent, if not even more primitive, of that like old school telephone with it goes to a switch room and they put you through or whatever. So we can't even fathom what it is. I mean, if you just go back to the 90s or to the 90s and you think about computing, think about computers in the 90s, what they looked like, what they could do, like just think about or think of video games.
Yeah.
And that's just 30 years ago. And you think, okay, 30 years from now, people are going to be looking at all the stuff we have now and they're going to be like, I mean, that they're going to see our iPhones and our Android phones and our laptops and whatever, and they're going to be like, "Oh my gosh, people used to, people, right? Like people used to look this." Just like we might look back at an Atari 2600 or an Apple, people in my age, and Atari 2600, the original Game Boy, the Apple IIe computer, all of these things were, and we look at it back and, the old, those StarTAC Motorola where, pull out the antenna and people had this huge, the old first original cordless phones, dial-up internet, which came later. And just in 30 years, in 20 years, people are going to be looking at all the tech we have right now and they're going to be like, whoa, I can't believe people used to walk around with that thing. Wow, that was the peak of technology then. And yeah, it's exciting in a way. It's scary in a way. Some of it's predictable. Lots of it is totally unpredictable. But yeah, I'm curious, man. It's certainly an exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I'm hoping we get past the. We were talking earlier about how we think we're past peak woke.
Mm,
Obviously, we're it's going to drag on, but that is something that I want to make sure we touch on, because as I spent some time knowing that we were going to sit down, and I went back and listened to some of your music and watched a number of your podcasts, and it really just struck me, and I knew this. I had this sense already from your Twitter account that you have this way about, even in your rap songs, you're talking about crucial social issues. You're talking about abortion. You're talking about the focus on racism. You're talking about all of these different things. Um, I think we need more intellectuals like you in the space that have a way of addressing these things, but in a way where they don't come off as a jerk. Like
yeah.
they really are able to speak into people's lives. And I think you have that ability. So I don't know if that's some. I would love to glean some of that from you, because I don't feel like I have that ability. Usually when if it's something that's important to me that I'm emotional about, and I start talking to somebody, and my wife's like, "You kind of sound like a jerk right now." That even though you're probably right, you sound like a jerk. So how would you encourage people to speak out? Because like you said, I don't think we should be silent, and I think, and that's what makes me so sad. I hear from so many people they'll message me and be like, I totally agree with you. I can't say that in public. I'm sure you get that all the
Thousands.
time. They're like, I can never say this in public because I'll get fired from my job, or my friends will ostracize me or whatever. But so I think it's important that we have people speaking out, especially people, deep thinkers like yourself. So how would you encourage people to not just get into that tick for tack back, trying to get one-liners, but actually try to move people from point A to B as far as the way they're thinking? Because I've watched, even in some of the interviews, you can tell that people are actually thinking about what you're saying, not just trying to combat you. And that's a unique talent.
Thank you. Wow, this is a big question, man. I think the first thing to do is self-reflection and to develop self-knowledge. I've spent a huge amount of time by myself since like 2011, when I went full-time independently with my music. And, I told you I used to stand out in the street all day selling my music. And I've had a lot of time just with my own thoughts and ability to really think about, okay, what do I want to do in this world? What impact do I want to have? What do I want my legacy to be? What is the meaning of life to me? What are my values? What are my principles? What are my ethics? What's my sort of hierarchy of values? All that kind of stuff. I've been thinking about this since my late teens. And so I think for each individual, it's important to really get to know yourself first Get to know yourself first and get to know where your lines are and really have a good understanding of your values and your core principles. And then next step is, I would say, think about what it is. Once you've established what it is that you want to do and what your core mission and purpose is then, I mean, that gives you the next step. It gives you the next step, because then you can think about the space you're in and the sector you're in and your abilities and your talents and your experiences and your personality type, and you can get in where you fit in, right? Not everyone is built and wired to be on a podcast like this. Not everyone is going to be a YouTuber. Not everyone is going to be a musician or and anything. Not everyone's going to be a doctor or a lawyer, whatever the thing is, right? Like, we're not all meant to do the same thing. We don't all have the same interests, proclivities, and talents. So find out where you fit in and what your mission and purpose is. And then I think from that point on, it becomes easy to just live in it and to do that day after day. And the way you do it is not going to look the same way as the way I do it, as the way you do it. And in terms of courage, I would say a couple of things here, because I think courage is massively lacking in at least Western society on many levels. And I think, firstly, just as a very practical thing, is people need to recognize that you don't need to, I often encourage people to be 10% or 20% more bold and courageous than they currently are. I've told people before, you don't need to go full Zuby, right? And there's people who go way harder than me, right? You don't need to go from wherever you are now to, okay, I'm going to just be the most like outspoken, passionate. You don't need to become an activist. You don't need to go full on into whatever the thing may be. If that is your calling and that's your passion and you're good at it, then sure, you can put all your chips in. But just a 10% or 20%, you could be at college, you could be in your workplace, you could be self-employed, you could be whatever it is. If there's something that you feel strongly about and your values and your ethics and principles are tilting you in that way, be 10%, be 20% more bold and vocal. And you'll find that, firstly, way more people agree with you than you probably think. You'll find that it's not that scary. In fact, it's very cathartic and relieving to not be, wanting to say something and not doing it. I think every time you do that, a little bit of your soul actually dies inside. And so the more you
But I
do it,
guess my question is,
okay.
and I love all
Oh,
this,
sure.
and I'm being selfish here.
Oh
I'm
no,
thinking
all
more of
good. Go for it.
myself
Go for it.
because I have no problem speaking up. But
Mm.
I feel like you have a way of doing it in a way that makes the person want to come to your point rather than I may win an intellectual
Oh, I see.
argument, but they're like so pissed off that
Okay.
they're not going to change their way of thinking about it.
I get that. Well, I think you have to think about what is the point of the interaction, right? So what is your purpose of the, firstly, you don't have to talk to everybody, right? There's some people are jerks, man. Like, some people are unreasonable and there's no value to be gained in having a conversation with them or engaging in a debate or whatever, because they're just so far gone and they're so unreasonable that all that's going to happen is you'll get frustrated, they'll get angry, you'll waste your time, and nobody gains anything from it. So I think the first thing is, okay, is this someone who is open to learning? And also, you have to be as well. One thing I always keep in mind is I walk around the world assuming that everybody knows something that I don't, and I can learn or glean something from anybody and everybody. It doesn't matter. Children too, right? I can learn something from someone. So there's a humility that I have that I go into any conversation with, even in something where I'm confident and I might think, I think I'm right. There's still a level of humility of, okay, well, I could be wrong. I'm open to learning. And as long as the other person has that same attitude, and look, I think as long as you avoid any rudeness, just always be kind and polite. Avoid any rudeness. Keep one's emotions in check, especially anger. No ad hominem attacks, no insults, anything like that. And I find that most people, even if you're coming from really different perspectives on something, if you afford them that level of dignity and respect and politeness and kindness, it tends to be returned. And in the situations where it isn't, usually it kind of just ends up making them look bad, look
Yeah.
bad. I mean, so um, yeah, I guess that's the practical way that I think about it and the way that I try to do it. I think it's easier for me just because I have a very naturally chilled out disposition. So like, I've done over 500 interviews and podcasts, and you're gonna struggle to find me, like you're
Yeah.
screaming at someone. Like I just don't do that. Um,
Well, probably those years on the streets selling your music was a
builds your
very like
patience.
formative part of just building that sense
Yeah.
of both humility but also a belief in yourself and
Mm.
that it's worth putting your
And and to
out
get
there.
to get a little bit deep here as well is I do try to remember. Sometimes it's difficult because we live in the world and the world is very fallen. But I do believe that human beings are made in the image of God. And so when I'm talking to anybody, regardless of their background, belief system, what I may know or not know about them, I always try to remember that I am speaking to, there's a level of human dignity and decency that I always will offer to people just based on them being a human being as well. And I think it's, we're increasingly sometimes living in a society and a culture that doesn't believe that or, selectively believes it.
Yeah.
But I think when you truly believe it, it always acts as a sort of check on your own attitude and mentality and behavior. So I do my best to always bear that in mind. So, it stops me from ever going to going past a certain
Yeah.
level of harshness that's unnecessary.
No, I love that. I think that's a great note for us to wrap up on. I want to
Awesome.
make sure people know about your books. So
Sure.
can you let people know where they can find them, the
Yeah,
titles, and
sure thing. So if you want to check out any of my work, my music, my books, check out any of my merchandise, if you go to teamzuby.com, teamzuby.com, you can get everything on there. I have my own podcast. It's called Real Talk with Zuby. That's available on all platforms. And you can just find me everywhere at Zuby Music. So find me at Zuby Music, teamzuby.com. Very easy to find.
you have a huge Twitter following, a huge subscriber base on YouTube. So obviously your message is resonating with people. So definitely encourage everybody to check it out and follow you on those platforms.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate you being willing to spend some time with us here in the studio, and I'm hoping that you'll make it back to El Salvador, in a year or so. We can check back in and see the progress that's being made, and we'll definitely be following your career as things continue to blow up for you. One last question: did you convince Ben Shapiro that rap was music?
I did.
I didn't watch the whole thing. I
Oh,
only
okay.
got part of it. So
Yes, I did actually.
okay,
In fact, there's a
wow,
video I think, from 2020 of him speaking at a university campus, and somebody asks him if he now believes that rap is music, and he said that he named me in the answer and said that yeah, I changed his mind on that. So
well, that is incredible. You're having an incredible impact, and like I
thank
said,
you, man.
just all the platforms that where you've been able to be a guest and to get out this positive message. I do have one last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you prefer being the guest or the interviewer or the
Ooh,
interviewee?
wow, that's a good question. I probably prefer being interviewed because it's harder.
I'm the same.
Yeah, it's
I
harder.
enjoy that
Yeah.
more because
It forces
yeah,
me to think. And, I do so many interviews and podcasts that I don't like to be that guy who just repeats the same thing on every episode. I know that maybe there's some crazy person out there, but I think it's unlikely that there's anyone who's listened to every single interview that I've ever done. But I run under the assumption that there is, and I need to at least like give him or her some different. Even if I'm going over topics I've been before, I'm like, all right, I need to explain this in a different way or come at it from a different angle so that there's always something new, and it forces me to grow and evolve as well.
awesome. Well, thank you, Zuby. Appreciate it,
Thanks,
and
Mike.
enjoy
Appreciate it.
the rest of your week here in El Salvador. And you had to get a suit, right, for the inauguration.
Yeah,
So
I'll be looking sharp.
all right, we'll be looking for some posts on Twitter there.
Appreciate it, man.